Okay, Papa. Thanks for
hmm
being here. I'm excited.
Well, it's good to be here.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, as I understand, this is your 75th.
Yeah.
So that's a real mile marker.
Yeah.
And I'm real proud of you because you start with one and then you do two and whatnot. So well
Yeah.
done.
Yeah. I appreciate it. I love it. I think a lot of people get into podcasting because they think, in air quotes, for those of you that are listening, it's the thing to do. But you truly have to. I think that the more that I've talked to people and myself, my journey, it's like you have to love what you're doing because there isn't always fun times in podcasting and things of that sort. If you're editing your own or just whatever it might be. And so really um doing it for the love of, like, I love genuinely connecting with people. I love picking people's brains. I love adding value to people. So,
Well,
yeah.
and I think because the technology today allows anybody to podcast.
Yeah.
Okay. Theoretically, the good news about that is that it's taken it out of what is normally referred to as mainstream media, and there's so much information that can be imparted to the public. The downside is that some podcasts are just noise. Okay, unless you're really bringing a value to the podcast and addressing issues, just because you say I have a podcast, I don't think that's necessarily a positive. So
Yeah.
anyway, so
And a
hopefully,
large majority of people, like 95% of podcasts, they say statistically, like, don't go through the like fifth or the 10th episode. Like, it's really like you truly have to enjoy doing it.
exactly. So
So,
hopefully, after we do this, people will listen to this, say, "Hey, I really got something out of that."
yeah.
Because anyway, so
You're so funny because when I interviewed Steven, he was the same thing. He's like, I hope I'm your best guest. I'm like, I love all my guests. Okay. So, like father, like son. If you haven't
yeah,
listened to
yeah.
that episode, I'll go back in and
I,
I'll put
I
that in
have
there for
listened
you.
to some of that. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about, because for clients of mine, some listeners know about our situation that, like, I call it, and what I recognize what it was money trauma. And I think a lot of the more people that I support, the more people I talk to, it is a thing. And I don't know if I've ever really sat down with you and asked you, when you were going through the situation when I was 10, when, from my understanding, the story that uh, when you and I have talked about it, it was you made some financial business decisions that got you to where you were. And then it got to a point where cash flow wise and just in general, right? You were not in a position to pay certain things. And it kind of, you took a little turn. And I want to know that what kind of was your, because I think a lot of times when we go through situations, it's so easy for us to be like, well, why did so and so do that to us? Versus I truly believe like everything happens for us. And I truly believe now, looking at that, you were trying to show me and teach me about money and empower me with money. Do you feel like that was what you were trying to do when you were educating me and kind of telling me more in detail about what was happening with your business and the money situation?
Well, just to kind of put it in a concise picture, if you will, you have to understand that I was self-employed and I had been a excuse me, a Exxon dealer, and Exxon had increased the rent on my property or my station,
Yeah.
and they had effectively, due to the economic conditions, the rent, I was forced to get out of that business. And not having ever gone to or finishing college, I did not have a degree per se. So I had to figure out, how am I going to provide for my family? So I sold insurance and
Mhm.
I sold tax sheltered annuities to
Which are 4
teachers.
3Bs. Yeah.
That's
Mhm.
right, to teachers.
Yep.
And I was very successful at that. But because you're kind of self employed, you've got to set your monies aside. Long story short, we got upside down with the Internal Revenue.
Okay. And when you
And
say that, like, for the listeners, what exactly does upside down mean? You just didn't pay federal tax, or you didn't pay self-employment tax, or, like, what do you mean when you say got upside down?
that we owed the Internal Revenue,
Okay.
our 1040.
Okay.
You could file, but you couldn't pay it because I had to make the decision or the choice between putting food on the table
Yep.
for the 3 little,
Children.
kids at the house, right? And so it ended up that after a couple of years, the Internal Revenue sent me a love letter on a Friday afternoon, which is their modus operandi for anybody who's received it. You get it on Friday because you can't do anything for the weekend. And they had locked down our bank account.
Okay.
So the episode that you're referencing about trying to educate was we had outstanding checks that we had issued in our trading zone that where we lived. And I felt like it was the responsible thing to do to contact the uh, vendors or stores that we dealt with and make them whole.
Yeah.
And I might have made the wrong decision, but I took you with me, showing that sometimes things are bad, but that doesn't release you from being responsible and being accountable for your actions,
Yep.
which is one of the things that I made some notes here for our visit today. That one of the things that I find very frustrating in today's just environment is people are so quick to are so reluctant to assume responsibility for their actions. Anyway, long story short, so we had hot checks that I had to go back and pick up, and so we went around and did that. Now, and I've known from conversation I've heard and whatnot that perhaps that might have scarred a 10-year-old. I thought, based off
Yeah.
of, I thought I was doing the right thing because I'm educating, showing you this is real life, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But a 10-year-old
Mhm.
probably emotionally, and it's probably very scary because you would think that children, they just want to be safe, right?
Yeah.
And riding around with your dad as you go around and he's trying to, that probably didn't make you feel safe. It probably made you feel unsettled and, you know,
And also, I think too, this is also, it's like, even though we might be saying something energetically and how we are being, right? So I'm sure I was probably picking up on your stress and what you were going through. And I can only imagine, right? Like being, having, you know, mouths to feed, rent to pay, things of that sort, and now your entire bank account is locked up, like, that's a real deal, and it's like, okay, now we go into, like, survival, because, like, how the fuck are we going to, you know, problem solving? Like, we gotta be able to generate cash quick, right? Because it's not like, even if you did have investment accounts or things of that sort, I'm sure that they lock, like, what you're saying is, like, they locked up everything, basically, is what you're saying. Like, they just put a hold on everything, or at least
well,
your.
at that point in time, um, I wish I had some investment
Okay.
accounts. All
Okay.
I had was basically
You're
a
checking in.
checking account at the credit union.
Okay.
And if they've got your social security number, which they do,
Yeah.
they have access to everything that you're doing. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
so I
I
don't know if I've answered that question, but
It is, and I think that, you have to, when you're going through, I think everybody does have a money story. People will say, "Oh, I'm fine with money." And then, like, as we start to dig into it, it's like, "Oh, that everyone has a money story, a money situation." And I think that, when you're processing this, when you're moving through this, there's all these different stages, like, you talk about divorce and the 5 stages of, the grief and moving through that. It's like that does happen with money as well. And, I did go through, like, the frustration and the anger of, like, why would my dad do that? And then coming out on the other side and being like, but it came from a love and empowerment place, right? It came from, like, the intentions were pure, and one of empowerment and love, like, I wanna show you, and also recognizing that even though that might have, as you always say, scarred me, what that actually impacted, me on my money, right? Like, it did have
Yes,
me very conscious about money. It did have me conscious about saving and investing and spending. And so there are parts, I'm just, for those of you listening and watching, like, that I always try to look at in the moment, right? Like, I'm not saying when you're processing this to, like, oh, think amazing about it, right? Like, we do have to process what we're feeling. But once we get to the other side, we can see, the other person's point of view, and also that it is always happening for us, And so once I recognize that, then also, and I wouldn't be able to help people today if that didn't happen to me, because
that
there are many a women that have come to me that have said, they don't have the language for it, but then when I say, yeah, me too, I know exactly what you were going through because I had to do that myself. So there is, our higher selves plan all of this, and there is a reason for all of this. So I don't think I've ever said thank you, but thank you, because it really is, when you're at that point, when you're able to look at it from hindsight 2020, it has all happened for a reason.
I do agree with that, and I do think, but when you're in the middle of the fight, sometimes you don't see the benefit. But if you, of course, I'm 72, all right, and I learned at a very early age, that being 9 years old, 8 or 9 years old, having a paper route, that money, and I know you've said money's not everything, and it's not, but yet it is, because money affects everything that we do. So I learned at a very early age that if I wanted to do anything, whether it be buy a bicycle or have a TV or whatever, and I always felt like, because of my modeling from my parents, you had to go work, right?
Yeah.
Anyways, but going through the process of having to go around and pick up hot checks, the benefit of that was it taught me, don't be in debt,
Yeah.
keep your money. I don't have to have the fanciest car or the biggest house, pay my bills, have some money in my pocket, and enjoy life. As opposed to, I was thinking, I was at a stop sign the other day and I saw this young adult, this lady was driving this BMW, and I'm thinking that car's got to be costing 80, $100,000.
Well, when you buy it new, but as I've learned, when you buy it at CarMax, it's literally half because they're completely
Well, that is
overvalued.
true, but
But
this
yes.
this looked like it's pretty new, and the
Yeah.
point being is because now with the interest rates and whatnot,
Yeah.
so I'm thinking, because anyway,
Yeah.
but I can just tell you that the benefit that we got out of that was pay your taxes,
Yeah.
okay, whether we like it or not, pay your taxes, stay in front of it, and sometimes we have to schedule and structure our lifestyle because you may want versus need, right?
Yeah. And
So,
and when I say, money isn't everything, I think sometimes people can, like, we want to go to those ends of the spectrum, right? It's the middle, right? Money isn't everything, because if you don't have your health, if you don't have, there's so many areas of our life that money can't fix, right? I
yes,
mean, and also, yes, from a basic survival level, like, that need needs to be met first. But once you have those needs met, like you're saying, um money doesn't money will never make you feel any certain way, which I think, in at least in the Western society, we've been taught that it does. But I know lots of people have lots of money that aren't happy and fulfilled.
exactly. I
So
agree.
you want to dive into just family business,
Sure.
um, you know, your experience. I mean, I am so grateful for the time that I got to spend with you and Billy, my uncle, because even though I feel like a lot of times I learned it by, what do you call it? Fire? What's it called? When you get, like,
Through by fire on the job training.
yeah, on the job training, but, like, hurry up, learn real quick.
Oh yeah.
It has been able to help me and my clients so much because I had true on the job training. I mean, how many people can go into a 40-year-old business and just I mean, I learned taxes, I learned employees, HR, I learned vendors,
Ins
I mean, every
insurance.
insurance,
Yep.
work comp. I mean, there's so much that I learned. Um, so tell me a little bit about family business, your experience with like I think that you have a different view now that you've gotten out of it than you did while you were in it.
Yeah, ironically, I was in the family business longer than any other job or activity that I was doing, and I didn't get started until I was 40.
Yeah.
And the irony was that our father, your grandfather, had started a business in the early 70s, and my youngest brother, John, had been with my dad, Ben, Sr., working, and he had because after I'd gotten out of the Exxon business, Johnny wanted me to come out to the family business to be, quote, the business manager. And and he also wanted our other brother, Billy, who was at that time a union journeyman electrician. He wanted Billy to come out and be there. And he had been trying to get Billy to quit who he worked for and come out and work with them, and Billy wouldn't do it. But when Billy found out that I was going to be out there with Johnny, well, Billy came out within the second month, okay? And but it all sounds neat because now you at one time we had Ben Senior, we had our mom, we had our sister, who was also doing the books. Then there was me and Billy and Johnny's. I say the whole family was out there working, and you think that's really neat, but it's a lot of stress and it's a lot of, and it wasn't before long that Johnny, who was actually responsible for getting Billy and I to come out there, told us he couldn't work with us. So anyway, so he left, and then it was me and Billy.
Yeah, not just he left, but that was a I would call that a contentious divorce
It wa
between the 3
Yes,
of you, and that's what I came into that. I came into
yes.
learning real quick how non-competes work and
Not only did
courtroom.
Yeah, because not only did Johnny quit us, he
Yeah.
went into business against us, and that was the real kicker because I always said that felt like Johnny's the kinda guy, he's shaking your hand and pissing on your leg at the same time. So you have to be mindful, you know? So,
Now, because and we were talking about responsibility earlier, and I
yep,
think that during 2009, the wound was too raw to look at it and say, "Okay, I do have some ownership in this relationship." Like, 2 people have to get married and 2 people have to get divorced, right?
yes,
So,
yes.
if you could look back on now that you've had time to reflect and ponder, what do you think you would do differently in being in a relationship with Johnny and or Billy, your other brother, the one that stayed, that maybe you didn't do at the time? Because I think a lot of times egos get involved versus what's actually happening here. Like, so I'm just going to stop there and let you finish.
Yeah. Well, like you say, it it was basically a mirror image of a contentious divorce
Mhm.
because you feel betrayed,
Yeah.
you just feel wronged
Yeah.
because you feel like you're doing your side of the, and I mean it was a lot of things that happened before Johnny actually exited,
Yeah.
but it was, and it's just sometimes it's you know, things are just bad and you don't like them, but you have to keep on working through them. So, and you still have the business that he left, you have all of the employees and their families, so there's a big responsibility because he, John, was in charge primarily of all of the physical construction. So there was a lot of shifting inside, and Billy started doing the bidding where Johnny had been doing the bidding. And and Billy, I said for years that Billy was the rainmaker.
Yeah.
So what would I do different?
Do
I
you
don't
think you would have taken him to court? Do you think you would have spent so much time and energy on that, or do you think you would have just cut ties and focused on growing the business?
well, when you put it and frame it in that term, well, obviously, if you could, let's just cut ties and move on.
Yeah.
But it wasn't that. I mean, there were so many interrelated aspects of what he was doing and trying to take our employees and just so I felt like a fiduciary responsibility to our organization to protect the integrity and of our organization. So I was never look, I learned real quick anybody can sue anybody for anything anytime.
Yeah.
And the only people that come out on that deal is the attorneys. So would I not have gone to court if Johnny had been forthright and just come to me and Billy and say, look, I want out. I'm going to go into business against you. You keep what's yours. I'm going to do mine. And it had been a clean, honorable, but how many divorces are like that? People say, as you know, your brother went through a divorce and he said, oh, we're going to be friends. Well, that lasts about 3 or 4 days, right?
Well, yeah, you said this as a precursor, probably not even knowing that we would touch on this, but how many people actually take responsibility for their actions? And I think it I mean, obviously we're human and we have emotions, and also that's not when we make decisions. And I don't think a lot of us are taught how to process our emotions. We're not taught, hey, I'm really angry right now. I'm not responding. I'm not going to have a conversation. I'm going to feel what I need to feel, and then I'm going to come in and I'm going to say, hey, listen, I know you want to leave, and and it's two-sided, right? It's also the like we can't make anyone like there may have not been anything that you could have done that would have made him want to stay or even leave and be 100% factual and truthful. I'm also curious if you noticed signs ahead of time before it got to that point.
Oh,
Like, were there
absolutely.
signs that
Yes.
were happening that because I always think we like with the law of preview, right? Like, there are things that happen, and like, are we in tune and connected to what's occurring? Or, like nobody just gets divorced overnight, right? Like, that's been happening over time. So, what were you seeing that maybe you weren't either paying attention to or you didn't want to address because it might rock the boat?
Well, the irony was that prior to John leaving, probably a year prior to him leaving, we had a family council between Ben Sr., who was the president of the organization then, and Billy and myself and John. And we sat down at the table, and because Ben, our father, just wanted his sons to get along.
Yeah.
And Billy and I said, okay. And Johnny basically said, no, it'll never work. So that should have been the indication, but you you hope that things will improve. And there were small things that we saw. We Billy felt like John, when he was bidding, was intentionally putting out bids that was um, excessively
Undercutting.
low.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
the good news is we got the contract. The bad news is you're not going to make any money. And then we found out that he and our service manager, who I was in charge of, got new phones and separate phones.
Like a burner phone, I guess, right?
No,
Is that what you're
no,
saying?
no, not a burner phone. They were Verizon phones, and I didn't know about it. And then one of our customers told me when I was at a job site, he said, "Oh, yeah, your service manager called me. Did you know he and your brother Johnny are going into business?" And that's when I found out. So I mean, if you say, what did you learn from that?
Yeah.
I do know that making a decisions plural when you're upset, when you're emotional, is not necessarily the best time to do it.
Yeah.
And I've told you and your siblings this for many years that hey, if the sun comes up tomorrow, everything else is secondary. But sometimes it's hard to get in to ego comes into play, whether we
Yeah.
like it or not.
For sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'll be the first to tell you that, you know, as you know, I've been married 50 to your mama for 53 years.
Yeah.
And you have to think into a new way of acting. You have to consciously desire to behave differently. And
Mhm.
that's easier said than done.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a practice, it's a skill.
Yes, it is a learned skill and remaining calm because I have a friend that I grew up with and he always I don't know how he was always calm. He never got excited about anything.
I don't think you I don't think we have to remain calm because I think a lot of people that might be listening to that think like, "Oh my goodness," like because anger is a true emotion and I
Oh
don't
yeah.
think it's a safe emotion to feel. I don't think but and I think what you're trying to say is when you say remain calm, what you mean is like don't respond when you're
Yes.
in the feeling of anger and, frustration. So go and process that. And I mean, I've even had to learn that, like, listen, I got to walk away right now. Like, I'm really upset.
Yeah.
It's not with you guys, but I just need to have my space and I need to feel what's going on right now. And then I'm going to come back and we'll have a conversation. And sometimes that doesn't happen until a day or two later. But
Sure.
but having that awareness of am I making a decision in this moment because I'm angry or even elated, right? Elated isn't a great place to make a decision in either. So you would definitely learn how to maybe just be with your feelings and then have some neutral conversations. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
What you have learned, I guess?
Yeah. And when I say calm, I mean keeping your head about you and um not making rash decisions because you
Yeah.
can always do something you haven't done, but you cannot undo what you have. And I know that sounds, as Billy would say, that sounds convoluted, but it's like you can always say something, but if you've
Yeah, you
already
can't take it back.
said it and taken it back, and then you have to apologize. So anyway, but
Yeah.
so I don't know if this is helping anyone, but so that's part of being family business, and everybody everybody has emotions and egos,
Yeah.
and
I
so
I I think I'm curious if you would have I mean, obviously, you're a different person now than you were then, but would you have spent more time or invested in maybe some personal development? Obviously, the person has to be willing, but I think that side, like, I think a lot of times businesses are what I call 3D of like the actions and the doing, but how much of it is have we actually like who are we? Like what kind of employer are we being to our employees? What kind of, am I making these decisions in a rush state and like really knowing yourself and understanding yourself so you can be a better owner, employer, to your people.
well, I'm sitting here thinking because I know that Johnny and Billy and I actually went to a professional counselor on a
Mhm.
couple of occasions because Billy and I, we were trying to work things out and so
Yeah.
we could all work together. And at some point, you just gotta.
Sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes the answer is
That's
no
exactly
more.
right. And no is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, because I can tell you this, that the soonest you stop the bleeding, you can start the healing.
Yeah.
And sometimes in relationships, we're pushing a rope because because both people got to wanna. And if I'm trying to keep the
Mhm.
group or the family or the business together and the other person has emotionally already checked out,
Yeah.
just like you say, cut it and now we can start the healing.
Yeah. And I also think, I mean, this is true about divorce too. I think that we can have divorces, whether it be from business partners
Yep.
and or our spouses, from a very loving place. But I don't think a lot of people like that isn't probably the evidence gathering that we do, number 1, right? Like how many times do you hear divorces are so contentious and, you know,
Yeah.
the money's involved in all that versus how do I want to be in this situation as I navigate this separation? And that can be the same in a family business. If you decide you don't want to be together anymore, how can we do this in the most, and when I say loving, I don't mean roll over and just take whatever, but
Mhm.
also too not fueling the fire because we're also hurt and we feel betrayed and we're doing things to um I don't want to say make it difficult, but I think when you say like egos get involved, we make certain decisions that we probably wouldn't make if we were asking ourselves, is this a heart-based decision or an ego decision? It's very different.
Well, for years I thought about separating from the business, okay? And when it was just me and Billy, but I just felt like, and maybe I was weak or whatever, but I opted to stay in that business as opposed to go through and start everything up because you have to think about it. But this time I'm 45, I'm 50 years of age, and when I first went out there, I was 40, and that was in 92, and my dad was he was already 62.
Mhm.
And I can't tell you the number of times that I would go to him. I went out there as a business manager, but I quickly realized that, yeah, first off, we need to send out invoices for the work that we do. That was number one. And number two, we needed to have somebody who did the service work because I quickly realized that if you're just a quote construction company with bids, you're you get a bid, then you and what happened, particularly when Johnny was in charge of bidding, he'd get a job and then he would not bid anymore because now we can only do so much work. So now he doesn't the work. So you're not still throwing the mud against the wall, right?
Okay, wait, I wanna pause you there because that is what you said is so important because this is a common thing for entrepreneurs. Because we feel like it's a way to self-sabotage and it's a way to limit your income because you're thinking more from a scarcity way versus an abundant, like we'll figure out
Yeah.
how to maybe we hire part-time employees, maybe we like we'll figure out how to get the job done,
Yeah.
but so often we pull back. And I think also too this is comes back to a thermometer of like financial thermometer of like if you haven't created that capacity to have that amount of income on a consistent basis, you will do things like that to rein yourself back in to keep yourself at a and when I say normal level, I mean a normal income level to you that your body and your nervous system is familiar with.
Yes. And your brother has talked to me about that through the years. He calls it, like you say, your financial thermostat.
Yeah.
Because I have personally had employees in different endeavors that I've done that I would reward an employee and tell them, "Hey, you're doing a good job," pat them on the back and give them a doesn't sound like a lot, but a 50 cent an hour raise, and they quit the next week. They quit coming to work, and you say, "What happened?" And it's like you say, it it put them outside of their financial thermostat. Now, people listen to this, they say that's not yes, that is in fact true because you have to think into because when you're handling money, it's very emotional and depending you talk about because most people I would say live from a scarcity situation. They live paycheck to paycheck. Look at the check cashing places around town, wherever you live, and they say, or now you see different ads on the internet, or you're watching TV, and you can get your check 2 days early
Yeah.
because people are working and they get paid week to week. And anyway, I'm just telling you that. So
But it is that, which goes back to that personal development of like, okay, if I want to generate X amount of income, who you have to become a new person, because if
you
you
have,
already
yes,
were that person, you would already be making that amount of money. So what, that planning, and I think also too, the time to start planning isn't when you're at that, it's like strategizing and planning ahead of time, which goes back to creative ways of thinking versus that survival of like, I felt like a lot of times, didn't tell me if you felt this way. It was very reactionary at the business, and it wasn't from a planning perspective. Like, what do you actually want to do and what do we want to create versus in that moment kind of thing.
I would have to agree with that. I think that certainly, well, the train of thought or the thread I was going to follow a while ago was that I very quickly realized that bidding jobs, you get a job, you don't bid, you finish your job, now you got to get another job. So maybe you're not as profitable as you need to be because you're priced. So that's why I developed the service side of the business,
Mm,
because the service was a consistent cash flow 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, because when they're broke, they need you, particularly because we was in the water wastewater business and people cannot function without water. So
yeah.
anyway,
But I
so
think that, I mean, you brought up another good point too. It's the same thing of like you get clients and people stop marketing versus you
yes,
still keep marketing, you still keep doing those things because then you just build your pipeline,
yep,
or as some like in the service industry, it's like your wait list or whatever, right? Then you're building your pipeline up versus, okay, I have my clients and I stop marketing. And that is a skill, because as a solo entrepreneur, you are doing a lot of those things. The the blessing that CTWM had is you actually had people in those positions. So you
hmm,
did have a full-time bidder. I mean, I can't imagine trying to full-time bid and, do the
manage the
finances
job right.
and, like and yeah, when you get to the point that we were at, obviously you are hiring out, but that is something that a lot of people it, finding that balance and that cadence of like you always need to be marketing and also taking care of your existing customers.
Absolutely. And two thoughts there. Number one, anytime I ran a promotion, I always gave the same promotion to the existing
Mm,
customers as the quote new
new.
customer. Nothing fries my bacon more than and maybe I need to check my ego, but it just bothers
No,
me
it's like
because if you're
why
going
are
to give it
we
away, just give it away. At the end of the day, you have to realize all we are is conduits. It should be the finances and the goodness and whatever just should be flowing through us, and we should just become the conduit to let it flow, as opposed to, well, if you're a new customer, I'll give you $100 off, but if you're an existing customer that you've been with me for 3 years, I'm not going to give you anything. Well, so then, and see what happens is most people never complain, they just don't come back.
yeah.
And so you're doing your 75th podcast today with me, but that happened one day at a time.
Mhm.
And that's the way businesses grow. And that's also the way businesses die, one customer at a time, because the business loses track of what their purpose was, what their goal was. Are they, because at the end of the day, if you're not bringing value to the marketplace, you're temporary.
Yeah.
You are, because you're, let's be honest, you're just kind of like, it's a nebulous, because you don't really have a hard product. You're not selling gold bars or you're not selling shoes. You're not selling a physical item, but yet you're offering value to your clients to help them navigate in whatever business they're doing. Because the other thought that you prompted me about was so often, particularly in what I would call the blue collar work, plumbers, electricians, whatever, you'll have an employee who is very good
Yeah.
and doesn't take them long to realize they wake up one morning and say, well, I could do this myself. So they open up their business and yes, they can do the work, but it's all of the stuff, what I call in the background,
Yeah.
the books, the taxes, the payroll, the rent, the insurance. That's where they are lacking. And if they think they can just put that information, put it in the drawer and not take care of it, or, and from doing our business, I learned very on, and one of the benefits being an Exxon dealer, I learned to set aside our sales tax and our federal withholding taxes in a separate account because that's not your money. How many people, you may not be aware of this, but the the number of small businesses that go out of business because they commingle their withholding taxes and stuff like that.
There's so many that don't even delineate personal from business, like,
Exactly.
that it's a hu and this isn't, I mean, the deeper I've dug into, the banking and the financial and all of that industry, it's not set up to teach you this stuff, like, it I used to really think that, all humans had the best intentions at heart. But I really believe that there are systems that currently exist, at least in the Western society, that are set up to not have you succeed. And the banking and financial industries are two of them. And
I
I
agree.
can't tell you, I mean, how many people I talk to that they understanding the taxes, understanding how bookkeeping works, understanding insurance, like that's a real thing. And yes, we learn by doing and also doing and when we learn and we learn at the cost of, you know, 25, 50, $100,000, like that is a lesson that would be maybe better served learn by not having to spend that type of money.
Well, what I was going to comment about is that I think the public education system is woefully inept at teaching people, again, going back to handling money, how to how to balance their check, just basic stuff that people don't do. Um and unfortunately, like I say, if you're a business operator, and like you say, they don't separate the monies, they commingle, so they're buying groceries out of the operating account. It's all of these things you and I look at because we've done it, we know, but for a small business person, so they get one check, it's a company, ABC company, and all the money goes in there, and that's what they're buying gas and they're buying groceries and they're paying their payroll, and they don't realize they need to separate it and treat each activity separately.
Well, when I talk about the banking and the financial industry, like the school system is set up that way on purpose
Yes.
because it's really set up from a disempowered way. Because if you actually knew about money, if you knew how to manage your money, then you may not need all of these people that we have now created to handle your money. Yes, I believe in advisors. I believe in paying for advice and all of that. And also, I can't tell you how many people tell me it's so complicated, but it doesn't need to be. And it's almost this like, and then you throw emotions into it with money and you feel shameful or you feel guilt that you don't know how to do this. It's like, I took so many years of finance and still didn't learn some of this stuff.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
so, to those of you that are listening that you're like, "You know what? I don't know." It's okay that you don't know. Like that's the first step, right? Like I don't know and that's what I hear all the time. I don't know what I don't know. you wouldn't be the first person that says this to me,
That's
right?
right.
Or ever utters that out of your mouth. And also the more that we talk about this, the more that we say, I don't know this, I want some help, the more that it's almost like this dirty little secret that nobody talks about versus saying like, "Hey, I really need some support with understanding how this works." Because I think also as a business owner, you're really good at your craft. Like, and this
Yes.
is also something too. It's like you can be good at your craft and not be great at understanding how your bookkeeping and taxes work. It's totally okay, but that is a skill you can learn. And I also want to say about abdicating responsibility, because I think a lot of small businesses, I've heard this a lot too, of like, oh, well, my CPA handles that, or oh, my attorney handles that.
Yep.
That that talk about owning responsibility, like we did at the very beginning. You have to own your responsibility of like, but the buck stops with you. Like you have to be able to know how to read taxes. You have to know how money works in your business. And to say that, oh, the CPA, well, I've worked with many CPAs and I've had to correct their tax returns. So
Absolutely.
just
Right.
because they have, letters behind their name does not deem that they are 100%, you know,
I agree completely. And again, small business people, they would, like you say, they would basically just shove that responsibility off, let somebody else take care of it. But in reality, so what you're saying is you're letting somebody who's not in your business going to be looking at it as if with the
it's their
same
business.
concern exactly
Mhm.
as you have, which is not going to be there. So
Yeah.
anyway, so one thing I do want to say with small business people is, and we've all heard this, when I say all of us, if you're in the working age, don't put all your eggs in one basket. And I can tell you that I have tried numerous activities, endeavors outside of my business. And what I learned was, if you want to know, because one of the questions you said, if you look back, what would you say to yourself or
Mm.
someone else that you would do different? And I would say, I would have one basket and I'd watch it very close. So, whatever your function is, become a student of that business. Be the best you can be. Started this podcast with you saying how you love it. Well, since you love it, it's not work. Now, it may be effort, but it's
Mhm.
not work.
Yeah.
And to try it would be like, so you want to do podcasting and you're also going to try to do, I don't know, as an example, Tupperware or Mary Kay or whatever, and you start dividing your time up. So at the end, I call it like it's the clown at the circus spinning the plates.
Yeah, there's a book called, and I'll put it in the show notes. It's called The One Thing. I think that's the book. I'll have to look at it. But basically, if you can imagine a circle and you can imagine arrows going out of the 360-degree circle, right? Like that's what Papa's talking about. But when you really hone in and you spend your energy on one thing,
Yes,
circle one arrow up, how much energy is, and you get better at it, right? Like you can't get better at something that you do every once in a while versus, you know, it- having like, with CTWM, like the service, it's like you're able to know what your customers want. You're able to anticipate that. You're able to, have a certain geographical area that you help them with. You're able to put certain, the word that's coming to mind is cost of goods sold, but that's not the word I want to use. Materials on the trucks because you're used
hmm,
to doing that type of work versus, I'll see like you have the lawn people that then do Christmas lights, that then do this and that. And it's just like you're spreading yourself so thin that you
yes,
cannot become a really good master at your craft because
exactly.
you're everywhere. And I think that that comes from, I'd be curious what your thoughts are. I think that that comes from maybe when I say a lack of income, like not generating the income that they want, and they think, oh, well, if I just go do this over here, versus how do I get better at what I'm doing and how do I get more profitable? How do I get faster? How do I get those types of helpful questions to increase your income versus spreading yourself all over.
Oh, I agree completely. And from talking, you said you had a podcast with your brother, S- Stephen,
Yeah.
and he and I, through the years, have had multiple philosophical discussions about, because he always told me that my reality, I was locked in because I felt like I had to be actively involved, and he felt like you could just hire it done. And yet, if I look and he and I, we've had conversation. I've been very candid with him. I said, it's easy to get, quote, a partner. Getting a partnership going is easy. Getting out of the partnership is what's uneasy and what's expensive. And Stephen, through the years, has experienced because he would hire somebody and then he's disappointed with what they are doing because they're not doing what he thought he should do. And as a consequence, I've seen multiple times him have a problem. It's a it's a because you have a partner that they're not doing what you think, right? So
I think I believe I agree with what he's saying in terms of you can hire it out only after you know it so well in and
absolutely.
out that you can teach it. Because if you don't know, I mean, I was talking to a colleague and she was like, "My books are all fucked up." But that's because she let someone do the books and she wasn't, either she didn't know or she was, not paying attention or having regular, right? Like, so if you don't know what you are farming out, you don't know how long it takes.
Yep.
You don't know if they're telling you, and so hiring it out is perfectly fine, but you also want to pause and ask yourself, why am I hiring it out? Like, I think a lot of times we try to solve problems that either one don't exist or we're solving the incorrect problem.
Well, reflecting on what we said about the small business person, if he's a plumber, he's really good at doing plumbing, but he doesn't know how to do the books. Well, he's probably going to have to hire that out. I understand that.
Yeah.
But saying he wants to grow his business, so he's going to have somebody come in as a partner, I would caution against that because I think the expression is the only ship that won't float is a partnership,
You've
right?
always said that. But I wanna go back to the hiring out the bookkeeping. I think that is important that you understand, because even if you hire it out, I still wanna iterate. Even if you hire it out, you still need to
Have
know
to
your
be
numbers.
involved. You have
You
to, yeah,
have to be involved.
absolutely.
You do not just get to be like, "Okay, well, the bookkeeper takes care of that." Like, where is that? You have to put on your owner hat and be like, "What are my numbers?" And if you don't understand it, okay, then you're gonna pay to get it explained to you, but really understanding how that stuff works is so important.
Well, if you look again at the marketplace as a whole right now, and the biggest expense of any business is what?
I would either say taxes or payroll.
But the biggest expense is labor.
Yeah.
It's it's the people coming through the door, depending on what kind of business you have. And
Are you talking
anybody
about payroll? Like, you're talking about labor, like
I'm
payroll,
talking
right?
about the employees or the
Yeah.
business people
Yeah.
because look at Target now. You walk in Target and they if you can fog a mirror and walk through the door, they'll pay you $15. So I automatically compute that as an 8-hour day. That's $120 right there for one person. You got 10 people, that's $1,200. So you've got to sell a lot of stuff. So you got to be mindful. And in today's marketplace, labor, that's why I'll just tell you, your business is very unique in the fact that you may duplicate, but you don't have 4 or 5 people you got to make payroll for each
Yeah.
week.
Yeah.
Because if you got to make the payroll, then sometimes you're doing things you don't want to do because you've got to satisfy that demand. So not to be philosophical, but that's a very real thing because and if you want to make $100,000 a year right now, which is what you would call kind of middle income, right? In today's marketplace, well, how much do you have to do per month and payroll and all that kind of stuff? So you got to be smart.
Yeah, well, when you said $15 an hour, it doesn't equate to $15 an hour. It's probably more like 25 time by the
You
time
are
that
absolutely right,
by
right.
the time you pay work comp and you pay,
Social Security.
yeah, all the FICA and stuff. And that's another thing that when I said at the beginning of the podcast that I'm grateful for because I had that experience to then be able to go in and understand like I mean, I've talked to women that are like, I didn't know that if I wanted, like you're saying, if I wanted to make 100, I probably more had to make like 250, depending on what profit margins are and like what else they have, right?
Absolutely, right.
And so understanding like, you know, dollar for dollar it doesn't equate if you're coming from a corporate job, making 100, it's not the same when you're, wanting to do a
Well,
business and understanding that.
if you remember, now this is going back many years, but there was a time when you called me one day and you wanted to buy a candle shop.
You know that candle shop has headquarters here? Can you believe that?
Is that
It's
right?
huge. Yes. It's like a whole thing. And we're like, what in Boise, Idaho? Cincy is the candle company that he was, and I was thinking about going in business with a friend of mine.
So, but I guess because the building that the candle shop was in, it became vacant. So I felt like the business went out of business. So maybe going into the candle business would have been a good business. I don't know.
No, you saved me on that one because I do think that a lot of times people like I think what happens with business partners is we attract people that do what we don't want to do, right? There is a
Yeah.
synergistic relationship and there needs to be really strong expectations and boundaries of
Yes.
what we're going to do and what that other person or other partners are going to do
Yep.
because I think you go into it and that it was a friend of mine and you go into it with like, "Oh, this could be really fun and we could do this." But like who's the one that's going to be doing a lot of on the ground work and that kind of thing, and then that can, because you aren't clear,
Yep.
you could develop resentment because you are the one doing all of the things. So I think if you are thinking about having a business partner, it's highly, I don't like to say advisable, but I would say like ponder and think like, what am I trying to have this partner fulfill for me in my business that maybe I'm not willing to do and being really clear on that. I mean, it's the same thing like what they say, right? Like hire slowly and fire quickly.
That's
It's
right.
kind of the same thing of like test driving out, it's just like
But
marriage,
you
test drive some partners out.
but you're correct because if someone is thinking about having a partner, then you need to first off, 9 times out of 10 they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
And they don't know all of the ins and outs of a business. But so who's going to be responsible for making sure the trash is taken care of? Who's going to make sure that we have plenty of toilet paper in the bathroom? Who's going to be responsible for making sure we reorder in this business, in this example, the candles? Who's going to make sure we have bags to put the candles? So you have to have all of those. And then there has to be the accountability because if that's your responsibility to make sure there's toilet paper in the bathrooms, as an example, and there's no toilet paper, well, when you're sitting there with no toilet paper, you could have a lot of resentment, right? So
And I think this goes back to what you said at the very beginning of responsibility.
that's
Not a
right.
lot of us are willing to have hard conversations. I think the one thing, and you've always said this, like the one thing that if I have to have this on my grave, like I'm too nice, like Ben Gray is too nice. Like the one thing that people love about you also at times is your
Down weakness or
downfall is the word, but I don't know if that doesn't feel so great, but you know what I mean? Like it's because you do have such a heart. You do want to be kind, but sometimes like don't confuse kindness for or I should say because you are kind, what are you unwilling to say or do because you love to be the big teddy
you,
bear, you know?
or you want to be liked, so you don't
Yeah.
want to say things that are
Yeah.
uncomfortable to
Yep.
somebody who's not doing their job,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that is true. That is true. So
And I mean, that's a skill too, right? Like that is, and the more that I learned about human design and I look at like, depending on if you have defined in your emotional solar plexus with is what Papa is and I am, how those waves work. Like Papa's very much so like build up, build up, build up, and then it just explodes, right? And so recognizing and knowing yourself of like, how do I get to this point? Because you are feeling things along the way and you aren't addressing it, which, takes slowing down, which takes feeling, which takes having hard conversations, which, is a skill. I mean, it's not easy to tell your partner or brother, like, hey, I don't want to be in business with you anymore. Like, I think we're sensitive, heartfelt beings. Like, we don't ever want to come off as being harsh or cruel or, you know, and so those stories
Well,
get tied into that.
if we're being target specific, if you recall, because you were with us 12 years? How long did you work with us?
Yeah, I want to say maybe 10, 11, something like that.
And when you quit,
Yeah.
and you said, "I'm gonna quit," I said, "That's fine." Well, then you came to me at one point and you told me how, because you were trying to develop business, and you said you wanted to show me how me and Billy could grow our business, if you recall, and I said, "I'm not interested." And I think that probably hurt your feelings because you felt like I did not want to support you, but it was the fact that I did not want to further entangle myself, because I have to say Billy has been an excellent partner. Now, we sold our company 3 years ago,
Yeah.
but I have to say Billy was the perfect partner because he was the typical small business person. He was the electrician, and whenever did Billy get involved in the books? Ever.
Yeah.
Never.
I mean, I always tell the joke that like the first, I don't know, a couple of weeks he came in and he was like, "You will never write a check or be on our bank account." And then sure as shit, like a couple months later, he's like, "Aaron, can you give me a check?" But I think that, yeah, I mean, going back to what partners, right? Like you have partners because you probably wouldn't have had a partner that was all into the books.
And Billy did exactly, you're exactly right,
Yeah.
because he and I, or she, whatever, would have butted heads,
Yeah.
whereas Billy did all the bidding. So I said we were the perfect yin and yang,
Yeah.
because I took care of the business side and the service side, and Billy kind of did the construction with the bidding.
Yeah.
And it was a great, but at some point, at some point, I just I just became tired, and I look back now and I constantly reflect on the fact that I can't believe I did all of the things that I did. But when you're doing them, you're in the moment. You don't realize that I'm getting up every day at 5:30 and I'm working till 6:30 or 7, or I'm jumping up from the table to run to a service call, or I can't stay at the game at the weekend because I got a service call or whatever. And I just you look back, and I look back on myself and say, I can't believe I did all that. And people ask me, "Oh, do you miss being work? Are you sorry you're retired?" And I said, "Hell no, I don't miss it at all." But it's just, but again, when I went to work out there with my dad, I would try new ideas and he wanted to poo poo everything. And that was very frustrating. But as I've gotten older, and I've said this many times, I may not have climbed up as high on the mountain as I wanted to climb, but where I am on my elevation of the mountain, I'm okay with. And I would encourage anybody listening, happiness is not having everything you want. It's wanting everything that you have and being happy in the moment. There's nothing wrong with wanting more. I'm not suggesting that we don't strive to do more. But by the same token, I would encourage anybody to say, look, be happy where you are, focus on what you do, become a student of the business, watch that one basket very close, and really bring a value to the marketplace, whether it be a service or a physical a physical item or whatever. And just talking to you today, I'm thinking you may have done this, I don't know, but you ought to make a checklist of what anybody wanting to go into business. They have a checklist or a track to run on so they know things they need to get and they could I'm just thinking out, I'm freewheeling here. They could go down and say, check all the things that they could do and all the things they don't check. That means they got to have somebody else. So that gives them some idea of what they're doing. Like the
Yeah.
lady that told you, my books are totally screwed up.
Yep.
Okay, your books are screwed up. So do you still have the same bookkeeper? Or did you get a different bookkeeper? That would be the first question I'd ask, right? You got to, so they say you live and you learn. Well, I don't know. Did you learn anything? Because if your books are screwed up, you probably either need to A, change your involvement or B, get a new person or both.
Yeah.
Anyway, so didn't want to go on that rant right there, but I'm just
Oh, I also think that this is I don't know if this is worldwide, but I think in the Western society, the belief that more is better, right? Like
exactly.
that yes, we came here to planet Earth. We do want to expand. We do want more. That's totally fine. But the idea, I think sometimes you can get carried away with, you know, more business, bigger, more people, all of that. And sometimes the answer for some people is like, I just want to be a one man show, or I just want to have, a couple of 1099 contractors, or, something of that sort, versus I want to have this huge, organization and all of that. And if that is you, that's okay. And also, it's okay to be like, you know what? I'm totally okay with,
Well, you described us to a T because we were trying to grow the business. And the biggest year we had, we did a little over $7 million worth of business. But we had multiple layers of managers and whatnot. And I went to Billy and I told him because we actually made less money, although we had done more business than we'd ever done in a single year. The bottom line profit for Benny and Billy was less. And I told him, I said, this ain't right. We ain't going to do this anymore. We're going to, in this case, I actually said, we're going to pull our horns in and we're going to like I said, focus and really do and not have so many managers and maybe do a little bit more ourselves so that we were actually more profitable.
yeah,
So just doing, because when Billy first came out there, he said, coming from his background with the electrical company he worked with, he said, well, we need $1 million job. And I said, well, what good is $1 million job if it costs you 1,200,000 to put it in the ground? Because you'd lose money. So I know,
yeah,
and I don't mean to be flippant, but sometimes people, like you say, they get confused with more is better. Well, I don't know.
yeah. And they confuse revenue versus net profit, or they confuse, you know, and the reason why you're at 7 million, I mean, with the wastewater construction business, I mean, a tank, I mean, you had more bigger
Yes.
tanks, which is easy to inflate that. When I say inflate that number, right? Like you could go from 5 to 7 if you had, a couple more jobs that had big
Oh yeah.
tanks on
Yeah.
it. Um, but yeah. So is there anything else that you want to add that maybe we haven't talked about that?
Because just a couple of things. One thing, Aaron probably says, "Oh boy," but one thing I would encourage everybody is pay yourself first.
Yeah.
You're going out there and you're busting your hump. You need to pay yourself first. And I would encourage everybody to read the book Richest Man in Babylon because there are no new secrets, there are no new ideas. To be successful today is the same thing it was eons ago. Do what you say you're going to do, treat people fair. If you make a mistake, admit it. And, but you got to pay yourself first because you're going to be, I'm 50, excuse me, I'm 72. I remember when you were born and I held you in my hands in August of 1980.
Yeah.
Those years come by in a flash. Say, pay yourself first, save. You got to save for retirement because it'll be here before you know it.
Anything else?
Uh, your success is dependent on your inconvenience for the convenience of your customers. If you think you're going to be successful and everybody's going to have to get in line to accommodate what you want to do, I think you're going to be a little bit hard pressed. There's nothing with having boundaries, but you're going to, my experience is getting up and going to a service call in the middle of the night is inconvenient, but I was having to serve the need of my customers. So I think you need to realize that your success is based on you are meeting the convenience of others as opposed
Yeah.
to you.
And also the type of business, that's like Aaron would never be in a service-based business because I'm like, absolutely not. I'm not getting up, right? But you
Exactly.
love it. You love it. Just like my husband Jason, he loves to cut trees. I'm like, there is no fucking way I would work out in 20-degree weather. No way. He jumps out of bed, right? And so here we go back to like you truly have to figure out what you love because you're gonna spend a lot of time doing it. And you might as well enjoy and like Papa said, it's not that it doesn't require effort, but the time, like I call it flow, the time passes so quickly because you enjoy what you're doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I would also offer this one observation. It's okay to fail.
Well, that is how you learn. Like,
Hopefully, and sometimes people think, "Oh, I screwed up," or whatever. You know what? Yep, you screwed up. Dust yourself off, get up, and they say I've heard that the only way to become a big shot is as a you just keep on shooting, right?
yeah, yeah.
Anyway, so
Okay. Thanks, Papa. I appreciate it.
you're more than welcome.
Okay.
Hopefully, anybody listening will get something out of this. So there you go.
Well, my listeners that have family business, they'll be like, "Yep, that's exactly how it is." So,
That's
okay.
exactly right.
Okay. I thank you for each of you listening, watching. Until next time.